The stars were quiet that night, as if they too were holding their breath. For millennia, Earth had been nothing more than a memory, its people scattered, its world reduced to ash. But the fire of humanity had not been extinguished. It had burned deep beneath the surface, a hidden ember waiting to ignite. Now, after 3,000 years of silence, humanity's reckoning was at hand. The Galactic Council had underestimated the strength of a species that had known both destruction and rebirth, a species that had once been on the verge of extinction, yet now was returning with vengeance. The galaxy had once been a place of grandeur, an empire of alien races who saw Earth and its inhabitants as little more than insignificant creatures. They watched as the Galactic Council, an ancient, powerful collective of civilizations, decided that humanity was not worth saving. Their cruelty was unrelenting. Earth was burned, its cities decimated, its people silenced. And for generations, humanity's cries went unheard. Yet, through it all, there had always been a whisper, a deep, unyielding resolve to survive, to rise again. What the Council had failed to see was that humanity was not one to remain bowed forever. From the ashes, they would return. The story begins at the edges of known space, where a fleet of ships, once thought lost to history, now moved through the stars like a shadow, silent and unyielding. On board, the descendants of those who had survived Earth's annihilation prepared for a confrontation they had waited centuries for. Among them stood a leader, forged in the fires of hardship, a leader whose vision had shaped the future of humanity's resurgence. She had been a child when the Council had struck, and though she had never known the homeworld that others had lost, she carried its weight within her, a burden she would soon release in an act of unparalleled reckoning. The crew, diverse yet united in their shared goal, had been meticulously trained for this moment. They had honed their skills in secret, hidden away from the prying eyes of the galaxy. The ships they piloted, crafted from the remnants of ancient human technology and salvaged alien designs, were as much a symbol of humanity's resilience as they were instruments of war. The time had come to show the galaxy that humanity had not only survived, they had evolved. They had become stronger, more resourceful, more capable than the Council had ever imagined. The journey ahead was perilous, and not all of the crew members were certain of the outcome. But each knew the same truth. This was not just about revenge. It was about reclaiming what had been taken, about proving that Earth, though scarred. There were whispers among the crew that even after all this time, there were those among the Galactic Council who feared humanity's return. They knew the consequences of underestimating the human spirit. They knew the fury that burned within those who had been wronged. As the fleet moved deeper into uncharted space, the tension grew. Each ship, each soldier, each commander carried the weight of Earth's history on their shoulders. The elders, those who had seen the world fall, whispered tales of the Council's atrocities, their destruction of the human race, the suffering of those who had been left behind. The younger generations, who had never known Earth, could only imagine the devastation. But they had been raised with one goal in mind, to bring justice to those who had wrought such cruelty upon their ancestors. It was their legacy, their calling. But as they neared the heart of Galactic Council space, the unspoken fear began to settle in. What would they find when they arrived? Would they face overwhelming force, or would the Council, broken from centuries of unchecked power, be vulnerable? The unknown hung over the fleet like a thick fog. No one could predict the outcome, but one thing was certain: Humanity had come too far to turn back now. Their first encounter came sooner than expected. A fleet of alien ships appeared out of nowhere, emerging from the darkness of space like predatory beasts. Their designs were sleek, unfamiliar, but unmistakably hostile. The commander's breath caught as she scanned the vessels on her screen. The ships bore the insignia of the Galactic Council, the same insignia that had once sealed humanity's doom. They were here to stop them. The long-awaited confrontation was about to begin. With a sharp command, the crew sprang into action. Their ships moved with precision, darting through the stars with a speed that belied their size. They had trained for this moment, prepared for every contingency. But as they locked into formation, the commander's mind raced. This was no ordinary battle. This was a fight for their survival, for the future of humanity. It was a chance to reclaim what had been lost, to strike back at those who had wronged them. As the first salvo of laser fire erupted into the vacuum of space, the commander felt her heart pound in her chest. The battle had begun. The crew fought with all the fury of those who had been pushed too far, too long. Their ships darted and weaved through the oncoming barrage, evading with an agility that shocked the enemy. But it wasn't enough. Council's ships were formidable, more advanced, better armed, and far more numerous. Even with humanity's newfound strength, they were still outmatched. Yet, the humans refused to relent. As the tide of the battle surged forward, the commander's mind raced, searching for an opening, a way to turn the tide. There had to be a way to win. She had spent her life preparing for this moment, and now it was time to make her move. Her hand hovered over the controls, and she made the decision in an instant. It was time to reveal the true power of humanity's revenge. Her voice cut through the chaos of battle. "Prepare the weapon," she ordered. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that would change everything. The crew, who had been waiting for this moment, nodded in silent agreement. They had one weapon left, one final chance to prove their strength. The weapon was ancient, a remnant of Earth's past, something the Galactic Council had never anticipated. It was time to unleash it. As the weapon charged, the very fabric of space seemed to bend. The enemy ships faltered for just a moment, uncertainty flashing across their screens. The humans knew the stakes were high. This was their reckoning, their revenge. It was not just about winning this battle. It was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. They would not be silenced again, but the weapon would not fire just yet. The commander's fingers hovered over the control panel, a sense of finality settling in her chest. She glanced toward the vast emptiness of space, a cold resolve settling over her. This was the moment. Whatever happened next, the universe would never forget the day humanity struck back. The tension in the command room was palpable. The hum of the ship's systems was the only sound as the crew readied themselves for what would come next. They had trained for this moment, but now that it was here, nothing could have prepared them for the magnitude of the choice they were about to make. The weight of humanity's future rested on their shoulders. The commander stood at the center of the room, her eyes focused on the viewport ahead. The enemy ships had closed in, their sleek, cold designs like dark shadows against the backdrop of the stars. The Galactic Council's fleet had always been a symbol of power, and their presence here was a reminder of the long years of suffering Earth had endured. Years when humanity was nothing but a fleeting memory to those in charge. Their destruction a cold, calculated decision made from the comfort of far-off worlds. But Earth wasn't finished. Humanity had survived, And now they were returning to face those who thought they had been eradicated. The commander's hand hovered over the control panel, knowing that one wrong move could change the course of everything. She had no illusions about the danger they faced. The Council's fleet was overwhelming, their weapons far more advanced than anything humanity had at their disposal. But there was one thing the Council had underestimated: human ingenuity, human determination. It was this relentless drive to survive and evolve that would see them through. Looking around the room, the commander saw the faces of those who had stood with her through years of preparation. Each of them carried a piece of Earth's history, a piece of its soul. They were the descendants of the survivors, the ones who had lived through the cataclysmic event that had shattered their world. Now, they were the ones who would bring the Council to its knees. On the bridge, the navigator spoke up, breaking the heavy silence. "Commander, the weapon is almost ready. We'll be able to fire in a few moments." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that betrayed the tension she felt. The commander nodded, her jaw set. "Hold tight. We've come this far. We're not backing down now." The crew, though they understood the gravity of the situation, also knew that this wasn't just a battle for revenge, it was a fight for the future. For the generations who had never known the Earth that was lost. The Earth that had once been lush and teeming with life. The Earth that had given birth to a species now fighting for its right to exist in the galaxy. They couldn't fail. Failure was not an option. But as the countdown continued and the weapon came online, there was a sense of unease that lingered in the air. Even after all this time, no one could predict exactly how the weapon would work, how it would affect the balance of power. The Council was ruthless, and they had more than just firepower on their side. They had knowledge, intelligence, and resources that spanned across countless worlds. The humans were outnumbered and outmatched in many ways, but the one thing they had was a deep well of untapped potential, an ancient force that had long been dormant. Somewhere deep in the ship, in the heart of its core, the ancient technology that powered the weapon hummed to life. It was a relic from Earth's past, a piece of technology so advanced it had been hidden away for centuries, forgotten by all but a select few. It had been discovered by accident, and ever since, the commander and her crew had devoted themselves to unlocking its secrets, preparing it for this final moment. The Council had no idea what was coming. But the weapon wasn't just a tool of destruction, it was a force of nature. Once activated, it would send a shockwave through space that could alter the very fabric of reality itself. It was the kind of power that could level entire fleets. But it came with a risk. The humans had no way of knowing how the weapon would affect the galactic environment. Would it simply cripple the enemy? Or would it trigger something far more catastrophic, something they couldn't control? The commander's fingers tightened around the controls. "Ready," she said, her voice low and steady. "This is it." In the vast expanse of space, the enemy fleet circled like predators. Their ships, though advanced, lacked the unpredictability and tenacity that humanity possessed. The humans fought differently. Their movements were wild and erratic, driven by desperation and a thirst for justice. They didn't just fight to win, they fought for survival. The crew on the ships were willing to risk everything, knowing that what they were doing was not only for their own survival, but for the future of those who had never known freedom. But the Council had seen them coming. Even as humanity advanced toward the heart of their empire, the Council had begun to react. Their fleets were organized and deadly, their tactics well rehearsed. They had dealt with uprisings before species who had dared to challenge their authority, and they had always crushed them. They believed humanity was no different. But there was something the Council didn't understand. Earth had changed. The Council had forgotten what it meant to be human, to be pushed to the brink, to know the depths of loss and survival. They had forgotten that humanity could endure. They had forgotten the power of hope, of willpower, of defiance. As the seconds ticked down and the weapon powered up, the commander could almost feel the weight of her ancestors' presence, their voices echoing in her mind. This was their moment, and she would not let it slip away. She would see it through, no matter the cost. Her eyes met those of the crew. They all knew what was at stake. They knew that victory, though possible, would not come without sacrifice. But for them, this battle was personal. Every pulse of the weapon, every move they made, was a step closer to reclaiming their legacy. And for the first time in a long while, they had the power to rewrite their fate. But the enemy wasn't done yet. As the weapon charged, the fleet was closing in, ready to strike. A new wave of ships appeared from the dark expanse, seemingly out of nowhere. The commander's eyes narrowed. There was something different about these ships, something unsettling. They were larger, their weapons more sophisticated. A chill ran down her spine as she realized the truth. This was no ordinary fleet. The Council had prepared for their arrival. They had underestimated humanity before, but now they had a new strategy. The battle had just begun, and the commander knew that no matter how much humanity had changed, the Council would stop at nothing to maintain its grip on the galaxy. The new wave of enemy ships moved with deadly precision, their massive frames cutting through the darkness like sharks in search of their prey. The commander's heart raced as the realization set in this wasn't just a battle of firepower. This was a test of humanity's very survival. The Council had anticipated their move, adapting to their tactics in a way that was almost too perfect. Their ships were more than just advanced. They were a symbol of everything humanity had fought against. Cold, calculating might of the Council was now on full display, and Earth's last hope seemed to hang in the balance. "Commander, they're charging weapons," the tactical officer shouted. The gravity of the situation became even clearer as the enemy ship's weapon systems powered up, their deadly energy weapons primed and ready to fire. The crew braced themselves, hands clenched around controls, eyes darting between readouts. There was no time for second-guessing. It was all happening too fast. The commander took a deep breath. She had fought so long for this moment, spent years preparing for this battle. But now, with the enemy at their door, the weight of those years pressed down on her shoulders. Victory was no longer a certainty. Everything they had planned for could crumble in an instant. There were no more reinforcements, no more allies. Earth's last stand had come, and it would be decided here in the depths of space. "We need to fire the weapon now," the engineer called out, his voice strained. He was watching the system's energy levels spike, the weapon finally ready to unleash its devastating power. The tension was unbearable, the room silent, except for the urgent hum of the ship's systems. But as the commander's hand hovered over the trigger, a sudden thought stopped her. Was the weapon enough to defeat the Council's new forces? Would it even work as intended? "No," the commander said, her voice steady but filled with a cold determination. "Wait. There's something else going on here." Her intuition told her that this moment was not as it seemed. The weapon, while powerful, was not the only thing at play. Something had changed in the fleet's movements, something subtle but unmistakable. She watched as the enemy ships seemed to shift, rearranging themselves into new patterns. It wasn't just the Council's military might, they were planning something bigger. The commander's eyes locked onto the largest of the ships, a flagship that hovered like a silent predator in the center of the formation. "Bring up a full scan of that flagship," the commander ordered, her voice firm. The sensor officer worked quickly, their fingers flying across the console. The image of the flagship flickered onto the screen, its massive, dark hull looming in front of them. But as the scan data poured in, the commander's blood ran cold. The ship wasn't just heavily armed, it was also bristling with strange energy readings, an energy unlike anything they had encountered before. This wasn't just a conventional fleet. The Council had brought something else into the fray, something new, something that could turn the tide of the battle in ways no one could predict. "It's a trap," the tactical officer murmured, a realization dawning. "That ship is a beacon. They're luring us in." The commander's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. The weapon was ready, but it wouldn't be enough if the enemy was prepared for it. The flagship wasn't just another ship in the fleet. It was the key to the Council's plan. And they were drawing the humans in, just as they had done so many times before. But this time, it wasn't just humanity that was at risk, it was the very future of the galaxy. "What is their endgame?" the commander whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "We can't let them get any closer," the navigator said, urgently. "If they get within range of our defenses, it's over." Crew had no choice but to prepare for the worst. The battle was now a race against time. The flagship was drawing closer, its strange energy readings growing stronger by the second. The tension in the command room thickened, every heartbeat counting down to an inevitable collision between Earth's last defenders and the Council's might. "Get us in range," the commander barked, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "We need to strike first, or we won't have a chance." But even as she gave the order, the realization hit her. They were playing right into the Council's hands. It wasn't enough to just fight back, they needed to outthink the enemy. But how could they do that when they didn't even understand the full scope of the weapon they were facing? With the flagship now within firing range, the commander made her decision. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about intelligence, about seeing the pieces of the puzzle that the Council had carefully hidden. They had to disable the flagship before it could complete whatever mysterious plan the Council had set into motion. But as she prepared to issue the order to launch the attack, a flash of light erupted across the screen. Something had triggered. "Commander, look!" the sensor officer cried out in disbelief. The flagship, in that instant, unleashed a massive burst of energy far more powerful than anything the humans had prepared for. It sent a shockwave through space, rattling the ship and sending the crew stumbling. But it wasn't just an attack on their vessel. The shockwave had ripple effects, spreading outward across the battlefield, destabilizing the entire region of space. The enemy's ships, caught in the blast, were being torn apart. The commander's heart pounded as the room filled with alarms and flashing lights. The flagship had unleashed something far worse than they had ever imagined, an energy field that disrupted the very fabric of space, rendering their weapons useless. "Abort the attack!" the commander shouted. But it was too late. They were caught in the wave, their ship already spiraling toward the center of the chaos. Panic spread across the bridge as the crew scrambled to regain control. The weapon, the one thing they had counted on, was now useless. The tide of battle had shifted once again, and the human resistance was now on the brink of annihilation. The commander clenched her fists, knowing the full force of the Council's wrath had yet to be unleashed. It was clear now the stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. And with every passing second, Earth's survival was slipping further out of reach. The clock was ticking, and the real battle was only just beginning. As the ship spiraled uncontrollably toward the heart of the destructive shockwave, panic spread like wildfire through the crew. The once confident faces were now marred by fear. The bridge, once a place of meticulous coordination, had devolved into a chaotic scramble for control. Yet, even amid the panic, the commander remained steadfast. She gripped the console tightly, her knuckles turning white. Her mind raced as she tried to calculate their next move, but there was no plan that could have anticipated what was happening. Everything they had known about this fight had just been torn to pieces. "Damage report," she barked, her voice cutting through the disarray. "Shields are failing, Commander. Powers unstable across all systems." The chief engineer responded, voice strained. "Get the auxiliary power online, now," she ordered. But deep down, she knew it might already be too late. The shockwave had destabilized the region of space around them, interfering with the very laws of physics. Whatever the Council had unleashed was far beyond their expectations. The reality of their situation hit hard. The weapon that had been Earth's last hope for retaliation was no longer an option. The flagship's energy field rendered their weapons useless, and the chaos surrounding them made it impossible to launch any counterattacks. But that wasn't the most terrifying thing. What was truly horrifying was the fact that the enemy wasn't merely playing for victory. They were setting the stage for something far more sinister. Something humanity had never imagined. As the ship lurched through the energy field, something unexpected occurred. A voice, soft but clear, broke through the static and confusion, echoing throughout the ship's comm systems. "Commander, this is Lieutenant Drawn. We have an anomaly. It's human." The lieutenant's voice trembled as he spoke, the words heavy with disbelief. "There's another ship out there. It's ours." The commander's breath caught in her throat. The words felt impossible. There was no way another human ship could have survived this far from Earth, not in the heart of Council-controlled space. The lieutenant's words didn't make sense, but the more she thought about it, the more a chill crept down her spine. Earth's forces had been scattered, their remnants barely enough to mount a meaningful defense. The idea of another ship undetected, hidden in the vastness of space, seemed like a far-fetched hope. Yet, the lieutenant's words lingered, gnawing at her thoughts. "Where is it?" the commander demanded, her voice sharp as she tried to make sense of this revelation. "It's on the edge of the energy field," Dran continued, his voice strained, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "It's coming toward us." A feeling of unease spread across the bridge. Could it be possible? Had someone managed to send a rescue mission into the heart of enemy territory? The possibilities were endless, but none of them made sense. The energy field was an impenetrable wall, an anomaly that bent the very nature of space and time. How could another ship, especially a human ship, have survived out there? "Get a visual," the commander shouted, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. The screen flickered, and for a moment, nothing appeared. Then, slowly, a faint image materialized on the screen. At first, it was just a speck of light, a faint glimmer, almost imperceptible. But as the ship drew closer, the reality became undeniable. The shape of a vessel emerged from the depths of the energy field. It was old, battered, and scarred by years of neglect, but unmistakably human. The hull, though worn and damaged, still bore the insignia of Earth's once proud fleet. The lieutenant's words rang in the commander's ears. This was their ship. This was humanity's last hope. Impossible, she whispered under her breath. How? But the question would have to wait. The appearance of the ship brought no comfort. Instead, it raised more questions than answers. How had it survived? How had it managed to evade detection? And what was its true purpose? The commander's instincts screamed that something was amiss. "Open a direct communication channel," the commander ordered. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, finally, a crackling voice broke through the static. "This is Captain Valen of the Earth Resurgence. You're not alone. The battle is far from over, Commander. We're here to finish what was started." The voice sounded familiar, too familiar. The commander's stomach turned as a realization hit her. Captain Valen had been thought lost during the last battle, along with the majority of Earth's fleet. But now, he was alive, and somehow he had returned, with a ship that shouldn't have been possible. "Captain Valen, how did you survive?" the commander demanded, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and suspicion. There was a long pause before the response came. When it did, it was calm, almost unnervingly so. "We didn't survive," Valen's voice replied, cold and distant. "We were preserved for the reckoning." The words sent a shockwave through the commander's mind. Preserved? What did that mean? How was it possible? And, more importantly, what was Valen's true plan? Was he here to help them, or was something more sinister at play? The commander's instincts told her that the truth was darker than anything she had imagined. Before she could respond, the flagship that had been looming in front of them suddenly shifted. The massive ship began to glow with an ominous energy, and the energy field surrounding it intensified. Something was happening, something that no one could have predicted. The ship wasn't merely powering up, it was preparing to unleash a cataclysmic force that could tear apart everything in its path. The lieutenant's voice broke through the tension, filled with panic. "Commander, they're charging. It's too powerful. We can't stop it." The commander's mind raced as she watched the strange energy field expand, engulfing everything in its wake. The stakes had just escalated beyond what she could have imagined. And yet, the most terrifying part was the growing realization that Valen's return was not the rescue they had hoped for. It was a harbinger of something far darker. The commander's mind raced as the massive, unfamiliar ship glowed brighter, the energy field around it distorting the very fabric of space. The atmosphere aboard their ship crackled with an ominous hum, a sign of the approaching doom. She turned sharply to her crew, their faces pale with fear. This was no longer a battle for survival. It was a race against time to stop a force beyond their understanding. "Raise shields. Prepare for impact," she ordered. But even as she spoke, she knew it wouldn't be enough. The enemy ship was charging too quickly, and the strange energy field around it was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The sheer force of it was enough to tear apart their vessel in a matter of seconds. On the communication line, Captain Valen's cold, detached voice echoed in her ears. "You don't understand yet, do you? We are beyond the need for alliances now. The reckoning is upon us, and Earth will lead the charge." The words felt like a punch in the stomach. The commander's heart skipped a beat as the realization set in. Valen was no longer the hero they had hoped for. He wasn't here to fight for humanity's freedom. He was here to enforce the vengeance of Earth's past. The remnants of their fleet, lost and forgotten in the depths of space, had been preserved for one purpose only: to reclaim what had been taken at any cost. But why now? Why this shift? What had caused this sudden resurgence? She turned toward the tactical officer, her voice desperate. "What's happening? What is that energy field?" I don't know, Commander. It's as though the very fabric of space is being warped. It's not just a weapon. It's a new kind of force. It could rewrite reality itself." The commander clenched her fists, determination flooding her veins. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let Earth's vengeance destroy everything they had fought for. As much as Valen's return had seemed like a glimmer of hope, it was clear now that it had been a dangerous illusion, a trick to lure them into this trap. Without warning, the screen in front of them flickered, and for a split second, the view of the enemy ship changed. The glowing energy field that had surrounded it was gone. Instead, there was an immense swirling vortex, a rip in space itself, as though the very universe were unraveling. "Commander, they're opening a gateway," shouted the communications officer, eyes wide with terror. "It's a portal. We have to stop it." But how? They were powerless against the ship's overwhelming energy, and their own weapons had been disabled by the shockwave. The commander's mind raced, searching for any last resort. A thought crossed her mind, a risky, impossible idea. But if they didn't act now, they would all be lost. "Activate the experimental drive," she commanded. The tactical officer hesitated, confusion etched across his face. "Commander, that drive is untested. We don't know what it will do. I don't care. Do it now, or we're all dead." The commander's voice was a roar of desperation. There was no time for caution. They had nothing left to lose. Reluctantly, the officer punched in the sequence, and the entire ship seemed to shudder as the untested drive hummed to life. The vortex outside grew larger, its gravitational pull pulling them closer with terrifying speed. "Commander, it's working," the officer said, awe in his voice. "The ship is powering up, generating a counterfield." The ship lurched again, the gravitational forces intensifying. The commander's grip on the console tightened, sweat beading on her brow. It was now or never. As the portal loomed large, she saw the faces of her crew, each one determined but aware of the immense risk they were about to take. And then the unimaginable happened. As the ship surged forward toward the rift, a flash of bright, blinding light enveloped the entire bridge. For a split second, time seemed to stand still. The sensation was like falling through 1,000 layers of space, like being torn apart and reassembled over and over again. Then, silence. When the light finally faded, the commander opened her eyes, breathless. The ship was intact. They had survived. But the world they had entered was not the one they had known. The stars outside the viewport had shifted. The familiar constellations were no longer visible. In their place was a vast, strange expanse, filled with shimmering energy fields and glowing anomalies. This wasn't their universe. It was something entirely different. "Where are we?" whispered the tactical officer, disbelief in his voice. The commander stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. They had somehow crossed over into an entirely new dimension, a pocket universe that seemed both familiar and foreign at the same time. But the implications were clear. This wasn't just a tactical retreat. This was the beginning of a new war, a war that would take humanity beyond the reaches of the galaxy they had once known. In the distance, another ship appeared, massive, dark, and ominous. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The commander's stomach sank as she recognized the insignia emblazoned across its hull, Earth's symbol. But this was no fleet ship. This was something far more powerful, far more terrifying. "Commander," the communications officer said, voice shaky, "we're not alone." The message was unmistakable. Earth's vengeance had taken on a new form, a twisted, darker version of their civilization. And it was not just a relic of the past. It was a living, breathing entity, now hell-bent on conquering the very fabric of space itself. The reckoning had only just begun. With that realization, the true scale of their mission became clear. Humanity's future was no longer just about survival. It was about redemption. It was about finding a way to fight back against the forces that had once destroyed their home and to ensure that the horrors of their past would never be repeated. The commander swallowed hard. There was no going back now. The final battle was upon them, and it would determine the fate of everything they held dear. With the battle now behind them, the survivors of humanity's struggle stood at the precipice of a new beginning. Earth's vengeance had been exacted, and the Galactic Council was no more. The survivors, a handful of determined humans, had laid waste to the mightiest empire the galaxy had ever known. But victory came at a cost far greater than they had anticipated. The destruction of the Council had left a power vacuum across the galaxy. Planets, once subjugated, now had to reckon with the aftermath. There were celebrations among the liberated worlds, but the triumph was bittersweet. The future of the galaxy was uncertain. The human survivors, who had battled so fiercely, now held the daunting responsibility of guiding their people and others into this new era. The price of revenge was far higher than anyone had truly realized. In the shadow of this monumental victory, the human survivors found themselves grappling with a question that had never been far from their minds. What did it mean to rebuild? They had witnessed the brutality of the Galactic Council's regime for centuries, felt its oppressive hand in every corner of their lives. But now that the reign had ended, they were left to face the profound truth that the power to destroy was never the same as the power to create. The leaders among the survivors, those who had driven humanity to its vengeance, met in a cold, sterile war room. They were no longer generals or warriors. They were diplomats, visionaries. They were humanity's architects. Yet, as they stood on the cusp of forging a new future, they found themselves questioning the very foundation of their mission. They had avenged the fallen, but could they truly create a peaceful world, free from the cycle of violence and revenge? One leader, their most revered strategist, spoke first. She had led the final assault, orchestrating the coordinated strikes that crippled the Galactic Council. Her voice, usually firm and resolute, now trembled with uncertainty. What happens now? Can we truly rebuild? Or are we doomed to repeat the cycle of bloodshed, this time with humanity as the oppressor? The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Her question, though unspoken, was on the minds of every person present. The weight of their success felt heavier than any defeat. They had toppled a galactic power, but the battle for humanity's soul was far from over. Another leader, one who had been a key figure in the struggle for Earth's survival, looked out the window, the vast expanse of space stretching before them. We must create something different, something that transcends the violence that brought us here. But we cannot pretend that it was all for nothing. The cost of this victory cannot be ignored. Her words echoed in the minds of the others. They had lost so much. Whole civilizations had been destroyed, cultures wiped out in the war against the Council. And even now, many of the human survivors were scarred, both physically and emotionally. Would the vengeance they sought truly bring peace, Or would it only sow the seeds of new conflict? The tensions between the different factions of humanity had also deepened. The struggle for control over the remnants of the galaxy, the question of who would lead, and the fear of repeating the same mistakes of the past loomed large. Earth had been free, but now the survivors faced the daunting task of guiding an entire galaxy toward healing, if such a thing was even possible. As they debated, an unexpected transmission arrived. It was not from the remnants of the Galactic Council, nor from any of the factions vying for power. It came from a distant corner of the galaxy, from a world thought to be long destroyed. The transmission was garbled at first, but then a familiar voice broke through the static. It was the voice of a long-lost hero, a symbol of hope and resilience. "We've been waiting for you," the voice said, the words laced with urgency. "The war isn't over. The true enemy still lies beyond the stars." The revelation sent a shockwave through the room. The war against the Galactic Council had been just one chapter in a much larger, more complex story. An enemy far greater, far more insidious, lurked in the far reaches of the galaxy, waiting for the humans to let down their guard. The survivors had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The voice continued, revealing that the Galactic Council's fall had triggered the awakening of a dormant force, one that had been silently watching and waiting. This new threat, a force even more powerful than the Council had ever been. It was a race against time, and the only hope for the galaxy was for humanity to unite once again, this time. Not for revenge, but for survival. The survivors exchanged glances, each of them understanding the enormity of what was being asked. The stakes had been raised once again. Their victory over the Galactic Council had come at great cost, but now they were faced with an even greater challenge. To survive, they would have to set aside their differences and face an enemy beyond anything they could have imagined. In the days that followed, the survivors began to rally their forces, gathering what remained of their fleets and forging alliances with other liberated worlds. But this time, they would not fight out of vengeance. They would fight to protect the fragile peace they had worked so hard to achieve. They would fight to protect the future of humanity, not just from the shadows of the past, but from an uncertain future that now threatened to consume everything they had fought for. As they prepared for the new war that lay ahead, the survivors of humanity's reckoning stood at a crossroads. The question that had haunted them from the very beginning was now more pressing than ever. Could they rise above the bloodshed, above the vengeance, and create a future where peace truly reigned? Or would they become the very thing they had fought against? Only time would tell. The story of humanity's vengeance was not yet over, and as the survivors set their sights on the horizon, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, united in purpose, bound by the shared sacrifices of the past, and driven by the hope that their actions could indeed shape the future. The galaxy was watching, and humanity's true test was only just beginning. The reckoning of Earth had come, but the fight for its future had only just begun.